Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got Sarah Zhang, and we're going to be talking about social robots, but more importantly to that, future crimes and security risks of social robots. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this. I know this is your second time on my podcast. Where can people find you?
Thank you as well so much for having me, Tim. People can find me on LinkedIn. Just type Sarah Y Zheng, also syzheng.com. And I should probably plug our research institute here as well, which is the UCL Dawes Center for Future Crime.
Excellent. UCL being United College London.
University College London.
University College London, for those people that aren't necessarily in the UK. And I'm also, I know that you're very modest, and I'm also going to plug your book, The Psychology of Cybersecurity, Hacking and the Human Mind, which is out, and you can get it on Amazon through Routledge. We're not talking about this today, but I know that you're modest and you wouldn't plug it yourself. So
thanks so much, Tim.
So Sarah, let's dig in. First and foremost, what's a social robot?
Yeah, that's a really good question to start with, right? So when we started looking into this topic, we found 6 common factors to define social robots with. The first one is that they are man-made, they're artificial things. Second is they have a physical presence in the real world, as opposed to just a chatbot like ChatGPT. Third is that they fulfill a very specific social function. So it could be accompaniment, could be intimacy, but also education or certain care services. Then the fourth factor is social intelligence, where when you interact with a social robot, you have a sense that they understand social conventions. Then fifth is that they have a certain type of autonomy. It's not like when you're playing a video game that someone is actually controlling another character, but these things move freely and make decisions essentially on their own. And then the last one is that they are often capable of showing more complex movements. So what sets social robots apart from just a manufacturing robotic arm, for instance, is that manufacturing robot arm can only move in certain planes, but a social robot usually also has fine motor skills, for instance, tying your shoelace.
So we were talking before we went live about there was a robot called Pepper, wasn't there?
Yeah.
A number of years ago, which is a classic example of a social robot, because it had you could interact with it.
Yeah, that's a great example. They're still around and they're often used in healthcare settings, but I've also seen it during my time in IBM. Yeah, they're interesting creatures. I think by now, in terms of technological maturity, there are companies out there that specialize more in more fine motorics, or you can even think about companies like Boston Dynamics, right, where you see these really intricate robotic creatures going around, which might have military implications as well. And well, we shouldn't get into that now, but yeah, great example.
So where do you see the first major social robot-enabled crime emerging, and why that specific context?
This is a really good question, because in our research, we always try to rank the sorts of crime and security threats that we identify. And in this case, the most risky crime threat that we found, according to the experts that we involved in this study, is the exploitation of the social robot's social features for fraud and social engineering. So imagine a world in the next 5 to 10 years where a humanoid robot can be found in many different areas, public and private spaces, where you might walk into a shop and there's a robot who is helping you there. You go to a restaurant for dinner and there's a waiter who's also taking orders, which is a humanoid robot, potentially. If the configuration of the social skills is compromised somehow, they could easily be used for all kinds of fraud and misleading you or manipulation.
Yeah, I can see that. And what makes social robots uniquely dangerous compared to other forms of AI-powered devices?
I think this relates to the point that they have a physical presence. So we know that people can already get quite attached to ChatGPT and other forms of AI, like chat functions on a computing device. But having an actual physical presence of a robot that you can talk with that looks and behaves just like a human is, I think, a different level. So that really allows for more intricate types of social engineering, I think, as well as opening up the opportunity for all kinds of physical harm. So some of the crime threats, for instance, that we identified relate to using social robots in sexual offense cases. In the worst cases, when a social robot, for instance, is made to look like a child. So that really poses new questions for us as well as researchers, and hopefully we'll be able to work with policymakers and regulators as well to make sure that even though these social robots have a physical presence and we heavily anthropomorphize these things, we can still make sure that they can be used in a safe and secure way. I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but
No. We had a long conversation when we were preparing this, and I knew that this particular subject was going to come up, which is we've already seen with ChatGPT people becoming attached to what is ultimately a computer interface, OpenAI. If there is some sort of physical robot, there is going to be some sort of attachment, and then we come across the sex word, and then it's like, well, in a world there are bad people, and bad people could actually manipulate that. And I think that's kind of without, people can work out the sort of like slippery slope that we could be going down on.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there are a couple of experts that really focus on the sorts of implications that come with having sex robots, but we also need to keep in mind that if you go to Regent Street right now, there's an adult store that already sells these things in many different customizable forms for a couple £1,000s. So I think it's really time for policymakers and legislators really to look into this space, because we also found through this research that it might be like an underdeveloped or an area that really should deserve more attention, because having social robots or even sex robots, right, is really not a far-fetched idea anymore. There are people that actually have romantic relationships, so to speak, with these things.
So how likely is it that social robots will be used for emotional manipulation or psychological coercion, and what signs should we watch for?
Well, so based on the study that we did, the most risky crime threats are indeed about manipulation and all kinds of social engineering. So I think it is quite likely, and if it is going to happen, it could be quite harmful because of the sorts of emotional impacts that it has on the people that are affected.
Yeah, and I mean, if we've seen things already, haven't we, with ChatGPT, where and you could, and if we put ChatGPT in a robot and we don't have the various guardrails, then we can see that happening again with a robot. It's quite, so what types of criminals or organized groups do you believe will weaponize social robots first, and how?
Oh, so that depends on the use case, so to speak. So one of the other risky crime threats, for instance, that came up is to utilize social robots for illicit drug dealing and delivery. So for an organized crime group, it's kind of a no-brainer to try to do that, because social robots are inherently anonymous. So one of the countermeasures that we thought of is to have a set of identity markers or some kinds of national or international registration system for social robots, so that you can at least somehow counter that anonymous nature of social robots. So like with a car, who is the legitimate owner of a given robot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite easy to imagine how organized crime groups could exploit these things.
Very much so. And I mean, we're already seeing, well, people who live in LA and places like that see those Amazon delivery things like every day. And just as much as that could be delivering a curry, it could be delivering all kinds of drugs or something illegal. So
yeah, absolutely.
As robots become more human-like, how does that change the way victims respond, and does it make them more vulnerable?
That's such a good question. I think it makes them more vulnerable indeed, because they seem to be acting just like another human being. In fact, I think when you look at manufacturers such as, in fact, Tesla with their Optimus humanoid, they are intentionally made to have the physique of a human, also for functional purposes, like they are meant to move around in a household. But we also know that when when a technology looks and behaves more like a human, we tend to be more inclined to engage with them. So in the criminal context, I think that indeed it's more believable when a robot talks to you just like a human, and therefore social engineering might be more successful than through, let's say, a plain text email.
Yes. When it looks like a human, if people are doing things based on what OpenAI is saying, and all you're doing is basically interfacing with a website, when somebody looks like a human being and they're talking to you, it's going to be 10 times, 100 times worse, isn't it?
Yeah. Now we do have to note here that it depends on how much the robot actually looks like a human being, like how distinguishable are they then still from an actual human. I would imagine that in the future, robots will very, very much resemble a human physique, whereas now we can often still tell if the social robot is in fact a robot, even though they do emulate humans. But we know of research groups, for instance, that are working on all kinds of, for instance, soft materials and intricate like facial expressions that really make them simulate humans much more in the future. So hence I think again the call is really for policymakers, regulators to look into this space.
What blind spots do governments and regulators currently have when it comes to robot-related crime risk?
I think a lot of the work that we're doing is precisely to identify crime threats that are not happening yet. So all of the crime threats that we identified and will be publishing hopefully next year through papers and policy briefs, I think are things that policymakers should be aware of. So it's not necessarily the case that these crime threats are never before seen kinds of crime. For instance, we know about illicit drug delivery and dealing, but the modus operandi of these kinds of crimes changes because there's a new technology introduced. And so I think regulators should especially be sensitive to the new modus operandi that emerging technologies such as AI, social robots, etc., enable.
Yes, and of course it's really difficult, isn't it, when you're trying to get that balance between regulation and innovation, and also trying to, in effect, regulate something that is new. I mean, people are still trying to regulate social media, and social media is 20 years old now, or at least 20. It must be 30 years old now.
Yeah.
But in a world of AI, things are going so much quicker, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So instead of doing things in hindsight, I really hope that we can go more towards more preventative type of approach or anticipatory approach, where we know certain things are highly likely to happen, certain specific types of misuse or exploitation of social robots in this case. So if you can think about these highly likely scenarios, then we should be able to preempt them with regulation.
What role does bias, trust, and human psychology play in making social robots potential vectors for exploitation?
Good question. I think as social robots evolve to look and behave exactly like human beings, all of the biases, etc., that we have towards actual people will probably translate as well to social robots. A simple example is when social robots are made to look like a certain race or a certain gender, it's very easy for people to anthropomorphize those social robots according to those looks. And for instance, there's this case where people might be verbally abusing a robot. It's not really abuse because the robot doesn't have feelings, but if the representation of, for instance, racial slur or sexist language against that robot does get criminalized in the future, that's a whole different type of legislation that you would have to apply.
When we did the preparation call, you talked about that with different cultural differences, Japan, China, Singapore, Europe, the UK, US, and of course, then if you put different, and there could be, based on all kinds of things that people could be biased against. I guess that there's a whole melting pot of things that we don't know yet.
Yeah, I think generally that cultural difference is really interesting because we tend to see that in East Asia, robots are much more widely accepted by society as opposed to here in the West. And I think part of that also comes from more concern about data privacy. Whereas we know that, for instance, in Japan, largely aging society, robots have been introduced in public spaces way before we are seeing it here in the West. So maybe people are also partially more accustomed to the idea that you can interact with a robot and it's fine if they record your face when you talk to them, etc., in order to function. But yeah, it is going to inform as well how we want to regulate these things.
Also interesting when we talked about before about robot rights versus human rights.
Yeah, so this also relates again a bit to that verbal abuse case as well as sexual offenses with or against a social robot, where because the robot is an object, strictly speaking, you can't really impose the same legal personhood onto that object as we do for actual human beings or even organizations. But there are some scholars out there who say, well, because of the ideas of human beings that we project onto them, maybe they do deserve a certain type of rights. Maybe not the same kinds of rights as human rights, but a separate, let's say, branch of legislation specifically for anthropomorphic technologies.
So it's interesting, you talked about there being, if we're interacting with social robots, there's likely to be some sort of data collection. So how might a social robot conduct surveillance or data extraction without the owner actually realizing it?
Oh, good question. So I think this depends heavily on the use case. So we know that certain types of social robots are actually already being used to patrol public spaces. For instance, you can find them in the Singapore airport. We know in California, the police has been experimenting with these technologies. So then it's really the responsibility of those institutes, let's say the governmental agencies or the police, to be very mindful of what data is collected and when. We are trusting in a way that they have the right mandate to record whatever data they think they need. But let's say you are walking around in the airport and a social robot picks up a suspicious behavior. Someone might be, I don't know, behaving in a suspicious way, potential national security threat. Then I would imagine that the social robot then has the not obligation, but the sort of permission to then record whatever data is required of that particular suspect.
Well, if the social robot has facial recognition software, and reckons that you are not a nice person, for example, it must have a mandate to do something.
Yeah, yeah. I think these are exactly.
Which the minimum would probably be to call another human.
Yeah, interesting point. I know.
Or maybe a robot SWAT team.
Could be the case in the future, in fact. Yeah, I think this is precisely the kind of question that regulators should be thinking about. Indeed, if they were to implement social robots in their law enforcement operations.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on and talking about social robots. Mention your conference that you're coming up, that's coming up.
Yes, so there's the International Conference on Social Robotics next year in July here in London. And we are
That's
hosting
July 2026 for those people that are watching this in 2030.
Yes, thanks for clarifying that. So we are organizing a special session just on the crime and security implications of social robots, where academics, artists, other policymakers, and law enforcers are welcome. If you go to the website ICSR, I think .co.uk, well, look for International Conference on Social Robots, you will be able to find it.
I'll put the URL in the notes.
Yeah, great.
Okay, and you are, and if people want to search for you, it's, I know you've got your own website, isn't it? It's what's your, it's a .com, isn't it? So
yeah, it's syzheng.com.
Yeah. And you are at, let me get, so you are University College London, aren't you? UCL.
Yeah.
Right, excellent. And the other thing we need to plug, obviously, is your book, The Psychology of Cybersecurity, Hacking in the Human Mind. And if you've liked today and you would like to talk and understand some of the darker side of hacking, it's a really good read. Even if you will come out of it knowing a lot about hacking and some of the stuff that we should actually know what's going on, and we probably don't know about what's going on. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well, Tim.
And